Morning, this is Anne with Anne Wellness Photography, and today I am going to show you newborn skin editing, and we are going to do that in both Lightroom and Photoshop, which is my normal process and probably the normal process for most, if not all, newborn photographers. And if it's not Lightroom, it's the similar, I believe it's either Bridge or ACR that photographers use, but the functionality is all the same. So to jump in, this is a baby I photographed, and let's zoom in here and see. He has some flakes, some redness, some little pimples. His tone is pretty good. It's a little bit red, but we are going to fix all that, and I'm going to walk you through exactly how to do that. He also has a little bit, it looks like of a newborn rash here on his arm. So first, this is how I've already gone through my Lightroom steps. This is what it would look like after that. Let me show you what it looked like when I first brought it in. That's what it looked like straight out of camera. So it was a little dark, which I had to do because I shot on a white blanket and I didn't want to blow out any of the highlights from the light reflecting on this side of his face. And as you can see how it's lighter over here, that's where my light was on the right side of the photo, on the right side of him. And he's laying on a beanbag here, and I just have my camera in my own position tilted. So this is the angle he's at. So let's go back. So like I said, Lightroom, we took away a lot of his redness and brightened him up quite a bit. To start off with, the profile I use is Adobe Color, and you can use neutral, you can use portrait. Those are usually the three I think that most newborn photographers use, and you can kind of play around with what you think looks best for your photos, your camera, your lighting system. And then when I shoot, I fix my white balance in camera. And then I'll adjust it if I need to once I get into Lightroom. So you can play with those sliders there. You just want to make sure there's no green really coming through. He's not too yellow, he's not too blue, but we'll fix those more once we get into Photoshop. His exposure obviously had to come up. Contrast, I increased a little bit. Highlights, since it is on the white, I did have to bring those down. You can see what it does. It's not too much of a difference if you bring it all the way down, but I like to keep it as natural looking as possible from what the camera showed me. Shadows, I didn't do much. Whites, I didn't do much. And blacks, not much either. So that's discretionary. That doesn't really have to do with any skin issues. Obviously, if you pull the blacks down more, it's going to enhance the contrast, which is going to bring out the red. So we don't want to do that for him. Vibrance and saturation, I usually always pull down on a little bit because most babies are a little bit red or a little bit yellow. And I don't touch texture, clarity, or dehaze as part of my process, but if you don't have Photoshop, you could use that a little bit with skin issues selectively. Down on the tone curve, highlights I always pull down to about -10, lights -5. It depends on what you're shooting on. And darks I usually pull up a little bit too, and that just kind of evens out the skin tone a little bit where there's not so much harsh like highlights here, shadows here. But again, that's up to your style. The HSL color panel is where we're going to do a lot. Hue is where you can really play around with. If you click this little circle guy here, you can slide up and down and see. So if you had a baby that was yellow, you might want to slide it more so he's more red. He was already red, so we went the other way and took some of the red out. And that's just the hue. That's not the saturation or the luminance. So the saturation, I always pull down a little bit on red, orange, and yellow. And it depends on the baby. A jaundice baby is going to have a lot more orange than anything else. So again, like you can have your starting points if you see my numbers here, and then adjust per baby. So if you grab, again, the little circle guy here, you can pull down more and see that makes him look too blue and like cold. So we'll bring it back a little bit, but look, then he's too red. So you just got to find the right balance. And then once you do, you can sync your other photos in that group with what you just did. All right, so we'll go back to there. And then luminance is how, well, let's just see. If we pull all the way down on red, look what that does. Luminance is kind of like the brightness of the skin. So I always like to pull up a little bit on the red. That's if we do all the way down to orange. See what crazy things it does? So if you pull up a little bit, it just gives them a little, nice little glow. Sharpening and noise reduction. Sharpening I leave in here. Noise reduction, I just keep it at 10 on luminance. Because we're going to do skin softening in Photoshop. We don't want to make anything too soft here. And I shot at a really low ISO, so there's no noise here. Then going all the way down, the calibration, you can play with this if you want. I usually just make sure my shadows are not at all in the green. And then if you want to do anything with these sliders, you can. It's not really necessary, because this is just our starting point where we're basically just correcting for exposure as far as newborn skin goes, and kind of the tone as much as we can. All right, so that's where we are when we leave Lightroom. So what we'll do is we will export that, and then we will open it into Photoshop. I'm just going to export it for print to my desktop. All right, and if you want me to go over this export settings that I typically use in another video, let me know, I will. Normally I export as a TIFF, a TIFF, but for this purpose, just since it's a video, we're gonna just do a JPEG and make it go a little bit faster. Okay, so there it is, and we are going to open that into Photoshop. Go ahead and ignore my desktop. I try not to let it get too messy, but sometimes it does. All right, so here we are in Photoshop. And I just got to adjust my screen because I previously had this on my larger screen at home, and right now I'm doing this from my studio on a laptop. So I just got to make it the right size for my laptop. Okay, and so here's all my actions. So the first thing I would do with skin is I would zoom in and make him as big as the screen. And then the next thing that I would do is zoom in, because on this video we're just concentrating on his skin. I'm not going to go through a whole edit with you guys. The first thing I would do is try to take away all these little flakes and the little pimples. And the way that I would do that is with the patch tool and the healing brush tool. So these little band-aids and this little guy are what those are. So the healing brush tool on my Photoshop is J. I believe that's the shortcut key. I believe that is what came out of Photoshop. I don't think I changed it, but either way, it's this band-aid. And then the patch tool is this little guy over here, and I believe the shortcut key for that is P. So first we're going to start with the J, and you see this little circle pops up, and we're just going to hold that down with our mouse and drag over all the little dry spots, and that's doing a pretty good job of getting those out and not affecting the color or anything, just kind of getting those little flakes out, especially near a hairline. Those can sometimes be troublesome, and we'll go over the pimples. Now if you need to change the size of your brush, if you're working on a keyboard with a mouse, see, I just messed up there, so I'm going to do P and change it to the patch tool and circle it and then drag it, and then that filled that in better. So you'll have to kind of switch back and forth between those two tools as you're doing this, and change your brush size as you're going with your bracket key. So left bracket key on your keyboard makes it smaller, and right bracket key makes it bigger. All right, so we're just going through and getting all of the little flakes without messing up anything else yet at this point. And we'll get the pimples too while we're here. That looks like a little scratch down there. Now my rule of thumb when I'm editing newborn skin is I will take out anything that might not be there tomorrow or the next day. And what I mean by that is dry skin, flakes, pimples, you know, any redness, scratches. But if it's a birthmark, like a lot of babies have a stork bite, like kind of here on their forehead or here on their eyes, and it's just kind of a birthmark that lasts through their first year. In some babies, it's way more pronounced than others. So when that's the case, I'll sometimes ask parents, do you want me to take it all out? Do you want me to just go through my normal editing process, which will lighten it up and make it not as noticeable, so it's not like a distraction in the photo, and kind of do what the parent says, because that's kind of, you could go either way on something like that, because it is a birthmark, but it's not really going to be their whole life. It's not part of who they are. Okay, so that's pretty good. Let's zoom out. So that looks like all the scratches, and let's go to what it looked like when we brought it in. Okay, so there you go. That's what it looked like when we brought it in, and just with the patch tool and the healing brush tool, which are J and P on your keyboard, and clicking around with your mouse, we got the flakes away. So that looks awesome to me. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is take care of the redness. Now what I want to do is I want to find a mid-tone area on his forehead. So not a shadow, not a highlight. A highlight would be over here, a shadow would be over here. Here's a mid-tone area, and I'm just going to hold my mouse over that, and then I'm going to come over to the left-hand side of my screen and see this info box that I have pulled up. It's the CMYK values. What I want to do is just look at those numbers and make sure they're not crazy. So right now I'm looking at the magenta and the yellow, which is the M and the Y, and the magenta is higher than the Y. So we want to get the Y, which is the yellow, like 1 or 2 or at least the same percentage points above the magenta. So that just tells me we need to take some red out. The way that I do that is with a selective color layer. So I have it as an action, but we will go over the values. So what that was a selective color. So if you come down to the bottom here, the little it looks like a half white, half black thing. You would go to, let's see, well, the one that says selective color down at the bottom, and then it would bring up this box over here. We go to the colors. There's a drop down here, reds. These are the values that I start with, and then I adjust if needed. I usually don't touch the cyan or the magenta or the black. I usually just have to adjust my yellow as I'm taking the red out, and then I use relative is checked here. So right now this layer has a black mask on it, so it's not showing. It will only show in the areas that I paint on with a white brush. So if you go over here to these little squares on the left hand side, that's your brush. We're going to pick B for brush, get the brush. We're going to increase the size so we can brush it on his face, and I like to do it at a 20% opacity, so I just hit the 2 on my keyboard, and that changed the opacity of the brush up here to 20%, and we're going to brush it on and see how that looks. So make sure your brush is white, and then we're just going to click it on his face and see about the redness. We'll do on his arm too, because like I said, he has that little rash. Okay, so that looks pretty good to me as far as most areas of his face. I think you can see around his lips that looks a little bit purpley there, so we'll tackle that in the next step. And now I'm hovering over that mid-tone area on his forehead again. I'm looking at my numbers in the CMYK panel, and they now look pretty good to me. Just personally, I think I might pull down on the yellow a little bit. I don't like when babies look super warm, so I'm just going to put the yellow instead of a +3 to just like 0. Okay. And that looks pretty good to me. So there we go. Let's flatten that. And we will go, let's go look again where we're at now from when we started. So that's when we brought it in from Lightroom, red and flaky. And here's where we are now. No flakes, no red. All right, so that's looking pretty good. Let's zoom out. Yeah, and I think here, just around his mouth being kind of purpley there, that's what we're gonna fix next. So I have a no purple skin action, and again, it's the same selective color. We're also on the reds, but the values here are changed a little bit. So you can see what they are here over on the left-handed side of the screen if you want to copy those down. and I'm going to just do the 20%, and I'm going to brush around his mouth to see if that helps get any of that purple away. Great, that looks good to me. All right, and I'm going to flatten that. Now let's tackle his arm down here. I'm doing the patch tool again, and I'm just circling these little red, looks like to me it was a little newborn rash. Circling those, clicking and dragging to another spot of the skin that's not splotchy, and getting rid of that. Okay, so there's several other things that I would do if this was not just a skin editing video. I would liquefy his head here a little bit and make that like a little bit more round, because you can see that he probably has from coming out just this little misshapen head still. I would round that out, and the background looks pretty good. I would maybe just blur that a little bit. And then I would do some sharpening of his eyelashes. I would maybe add a little bit of rosiness to his cheeks. And that's about it. So the final step here, if you want to, and I don't think this is necessary, but I do it for all of my images, it's just a bit more of the blending of the highlights and the shadow areas. So just like one final step of smoothing. And guys, there's so many different products like actions, plugins that's available for that. There's portraiture, there's actions from Greater Than Gatsby, there's actions from, I believe it's Hello Little. I'm going to use one, it's just basically a Gaussian blur that I got a long time ago. It's called Powder, and you can get it from Heather from the Flourish Academy, and it's just slightly, I believe the main part of the action is using a Gaussian blur, and it's just kind of doing one final smooth of the skin, and I'm avoiding eyebrows, eyelashes, nostrils, lips, only areas of the skin. I'm painting it on with a white brush at a 20% opacity, just where, you know, there was those little marks. Okay, so that's with the powder action, and that's without. It doesn't do a ton, but it just kind of makes his skin a little bit smoother looking. All right, so that is it. That is how I would edit newborn skin. I mean, there's always more you can play with. I could even try like this purpley area over here. It all depends on what you want it to look like. Do you want this shadow to be this color, or do you want it to be a little bit more red, a little bit more yellow? It's subjective, and guys, I'm doing this from my laptop, so when I get home and look at this on my other screen, I might decide to do more, but those are the basic steps I use. So I hope you found this useful. Please like and subscribe, and let me know what you want to see in the next video.